You're meeting a guy on a first date, you're into him, and you want him to feel attracted to you. You want this date to be so successful he'll crave going on another date with you. In this video, I'm going to share the 10 tips that I learned after going through the trial and error of countless of my own first dates and analyzing other dates. With these tips, you'll know how to start off your dream relationship the right way and avoid the mistakes that turn guys off. Tip number 1. I used to think that a coffee date was the perfect way to start things off. It's simple, safe, easy. Everybody does that. But I realized that it's actually a bad idea. Those coffee dates were forgettable. The interaction felt forced and templated. You don't be just another guy in a lineup of someone's coffee dates. If you want to stand out, do what's called a pattern interrupt. Plan something a bit different. Something that adds an element of surprise or adventure. Something this guy hasn't experienced before. There's this one date I'll never forget. We met on a first date for a short evening hike. It had rained earlier, so the trail was slippery. And I ended up slipping and getting a few bruises. You might think this ruined the date, but actually we found ourselves holding hands to avoid slipping again. And later we had to find a pharmacy for antiseptic, which turned into a sweet moment when he insisted on tending to my bruises. That whole experience created a bond that you just don't get from chatting in a coffee shop. That's what I mean by plan a little adventure. It doesn't have to be fancy and no need to do any risky stuff. It could be a stroll in an interesting park or checking out some quirky location. The thing is, even if this date doesn't go as well, at least now you have a go-to location for future dates where you feel comfortable because you're familiar with it, and you have a chance to perfect that experience over time. Now, if he's already been proactive and suggested a coffee shop, it's fine, but just don't get stuck there. The date can start with his suggestion, but make sure that it doesn't end there. Search in advance somewhere interesting nearby, like a walking spot or an indoor activity. Then, during the date, if you like the guy, just keep the coffee part as short as possible, so you have time for a more memorable experience to happen. Which brings us to the next tip. The places you absolutely must avoid and never go on a first date. Here's the deal. First dates should be flexible. If you realize 5 minutes in that it's not going to go anywhere, you need to have an easy exit. Sticking yourself in a situation where you're trapped for hours is a bad idea. That's why a restaurant on a first date is a no-go. Movies also don't make sense to me because you want to get to know each other, but you're just stuck for 2 hours without the ability to talk much or do anything together. And here's another bad idea. A guy once told me he took someone on a first date to a spa and they had a massage there. It was so awkward, he just killed the vibe. Another important point to know here, avoid the trap of meeting at your place or his. Whether or not you want to have sex on a first date, that's a topic for another video, and I also wrote about it in my newsletter, which you can sign up for free in the description below. But one thing's for sure. Never ever start the date at your place or his place. Tip number 3. It's not about how you look. Many people obsess over how they look on a first date, what to wear, how to style their hair, grooming. But here's the truth. The focus on this date isn't about looks, it's about connection. Your goal shouldn't be to look pretty. It should be to create a real connection, a positive human connection. While looks matter and it's natural to want to look your best, remember that personality and attitude matters so much more. Your date, like you, has their own taste and preferences, so there's no need to stress over what you can't control. Instead, focus on the basics that would make you feel good. Make sure that you're comfortable in your clothes and confident with how you present yourself. When you feel good and comfortable, it shows. On the other hand, don't overdress or don't spend excessive time trying to impress with your looks and be fabulous. It can actually backfire and come across as desperate, which isn't what you want, right? So this also brings us to the next tip on how to remove the pressure from yourself and focus on what really matters. Tip number 4. It's natural to feel a bit nervous or under pressure before a first date. Let's see how you can minimize it so your nervousness doesn't kill the date or kill your enjoyment. Now, if you're thinking, this guy's the one, I want him so much, it's my 1 in a billion chance and I have to make him want me, that is simply not true. There are literally millions of other guys who could be amazing life partners. If this date doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. You'll be fine and you'll learn from it. Remember, this date is already a success because it's getting you one step closer to finding the right guy for you. There's no need to pressure yourself into thinking it must work out between you two. Instead, think of the date as a little research expedition. Your goal is to find out if you like the guy enough to want a second date with him. Notice two things here. You're focusing on what you want instead of focusing on making the guy want you, which you have no control of. And I also said to want a second date with him. It's just less pressure to be thinking about the next date rather than what the next 50 years with this guy will look like. Oh, and here's a twist. Even if you're super attracted to this guy and the date doesn't lead to a second one, you might have actually dodged a bullet. You never know what might have gone wrong later on. I found this approach to remove a lot of the pressure and the disappointment in case things don't go as I wanted them to go. And now that you're in the right mindset, let's talk about what you should and shouldn't be talking about on your first date. Tip number 5. First dates are not the time for heavy or controversial topics. Keep the conversation light and fun. Bringing up politics, religion, or past relationships, it can create unnecessary tension and awkwardness. Instead, focus on topics that are easy to talk about and that both of you can enjoy. A common mistake is diving into long discussions about movies, TV, and music. It's a hit or miss. You don't know if you share the exact same tastes, and most probably you don't. Then you end up highlighting incompatibilities instead of common ground. On a first date, if you find out, oh, I love musicals and he hates them, this can be a kind of a jarring moment that throws off the vibe. But in reality, it doesn't mean anything. If you love musicals, you'll still enjoy them with or without him. And it has nothing to do with whether he would make a loving, caring, and committed partner. Instead of all that, try talking about dreams, ambitions, future goals, values. It keeps the conversation positive, and it can help imagine what the future together might look like. And if you discover conflicting values early on, it's good to know before things get more serious. And here's a bonus tip. Look out for things you do or say that are meant to impress. Be self-aware. If you catch yourself saying or doing something just to impress the guy, stop. I've fallen into this trap myself, thinking the date went well, then later on I wondered why it didn't lead to anything more. And I reflected on what happened, and I realized that some of the things that I said and some of my responses to what he said might have well come across as trying to make an impression. And that's a big turnoff. So just remember that. Now tip number 6, the art of listening. Listen actively and show genuine interest in what he has to say. This is where you win or lose a date. Good conversation isn't just about talking. It's about a balance between how much you talk and how much you listen. If you tend to talk too much and take over the conversation, just don't. 99.5% of times, 100% of times it won't serve you well and be a turnoff for guys. If anything, make sure you let him talk more than you do, since we know everyone's favorite topic is themselves. Find out what's his favorite topics and let him talk about it and be genuinely curious. A serious mistake that I see guys make is one-upping stories. What I mean by that is, he tells you a story, you immediately try to top it. Like, I've been to London and it was raining for 3 days. Don't respond with, oh yeah, I've been to Iceland and it snowed for 7 days. That's not how you build a connection. It just looks like you're trying too hard and not really a fun person to date. Instead, be curious and ask questions about his experiences. If he says he loves hiking, ask, what do you enjoy most about hiking? Then listen and respond in a way that shows you're really interested. Now, I know we said we generally want to keep the conversation light and fun, and at the same time, we're also aiming at a deeper connection. So when a guy shares something vulnerable about himself, that's your cue to shine. It's your opportunity to deepen the connection by sharing something personal about yourself too. On one of my dates, the guy opened up about a tough experience he just had with his family. My first instinct was to offer advice, but luckily I stopped myself. It comes from good intentions, but it creates this weird power dynamic, almost like a coach-coachee, which is definitely not sexy. Instead, I expressed empathy and also shared a similar experience of my own. That moment of mutual vulnerability, that was a moment of closeness. Now, I'm not saying overshare your deepest vulnerabilities or anything on first date. Just find the right moment, if the conversation goes there, to either initiate vulnerability or reward your date for showing vulnerability. This is how you create a genuine human connection. Tip number 7. If you're having a great conversation and feeling a connection, that's definitely progress. Now, sometimes what starts as a date might evolve naturally into a platonic relationship, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're feeling romantic attraction, you'd want to make sure that the conversation moves in that direction so you don't end up landing in the friend zone. Now, here's when it becomes tricky. You could go for sex on a first date, but I generally don't recommend it. And it's also best to avoid even discussing sexual topics too early. If you bring up something like sexual preferences, it might make it seem like you're just another guy looking for a hookup. So, how do you avoid friend zoning if you're not discussing sex and not having sex on the first date? The key to solving this is to create a kind of romantic, flirty, risque vibe without crossing into hookup territory. You look for opportunities to signal your interest in subtle ways. You could lightly touch him on a couple of good opportunities or make some playful and flirty comments. One of the best ways is just to listen carefully to everything that he says. And if he says something that can somehow be interpreted in a sexual direction, go ahead and tease him about it. Then return smoothly to the conversation. There's no need to overdo it. Just a touch of flirtation makes all the difference. And while building this romantic connection, there's one topic you should approach with care, and that's our tip number 8. Past relationships. It's very simple. Avoid talking about past relationships unless he asks you directly about it. And even then, be careful. If your past relationships are too different from what he's looking for, that might turn out to be a deal breaker. And if you seem like you're still hung up on your ex, that's even worse. But sometimes he'll be the one bringing it up. And in that case, make sure you don't sound negative about your exes. Instead, frame it as a valuable life experience. You can say something like, I learned a lot from that relationship and I've grown because of it. I'm happy that I had this experience, but I've moved on. One time a guy asked me, what did you learn from that relationship? And I love this question. And since then, I always use it when someone brings up their ex. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about your date just from asking them this single question. And also, it's a great way to not be too focused on the past. Again, only use this if they bring up their exes. Otherwise, save this topic for later dates. Tip number 9. When you're on a date, distractions are everywhere. Maybe it's a hot guy passing by or worrying about how you look or the urge to check your phone. But here's the thing. None of that matters right now. What matters is being present with the guy in front of you. So put your phone away, never check messages on a date, one of the biggest turnoffs I hear about, and keep your focus on him. Giving him your full attention makes the date more enjoyable, and it also shows that you're generally interested in getting to know him. When you stay in the moment, it makes it easier for you to connect and have a great time together, which is exactly what you want. Now that you've stayed present and connected, let's talk about how to end the date on a high note. Tip number 10. Games like waiting days to call or pretending you're not interested, they don't work. If you like someone, tell them. It's that simple. If you felt a connection, say so. Don't play hard to get. Don't play the whole game of, I won't text for 2 days because I don't want to seem desperate. I did that when I was younger, and for some reason I believed it's a good idea. And it never worked. It never worked well. If anything, I was sending confusing signals which drove away the good guys and left me with those who are into stupid games and unhealthy relationship dynamics. So at the end of the date, if you want to see him again, say, "I had a great time and I'd love to see you again." Expressing your interest right away, it does two important things. It shows that you're genuinely into him, and it also keeps the momentum going. And better yet, suggest a specific idea for the next date, especially if it came up naturally in a conversation. For example, when he mentions an activity he likes doing, let's say hiking, and you're excited about that too, express your excitement and suggest meeting again in a few days to hike together. Try this approach on your next date and let me know in the comments below how it worked for you. If you want to find and keep the love of your life, subscribe to my channel and sign up to my newsletter where you'll get exclusive content on gay dates and relationships. It's free and you'll find the link in the description.